In chapter 11 of book 8, the Bab outlines in detail the provisions for the preparation and burial of the dead. You're going to see there are several chapters, both in book 8 and also book 9, that the Bab talks about the Bábí burial, which is very similar to the Baha'i burial as well. In the opening lines of the chapter, he writes, "The substance of this gate or chapter is that all the commandments of the Bayán have been revealed on the basis of the mysteries of the recognition of God and his divine unity, such that if one gazeth upon them from the beginning to the end, he would observe that the same crystal waters of divine unity streameth forth in all of them in the same manner." This statement is very profound and worth reflecting on. Continuing later in the same chapter, the Bab writes, "Know verily that death is like unto life. If at the time of one's death the individual had come to recognize the manifestation of God for that day, then he or she would soar with absolute joy and elation in the divine paradise. Otherwise, they would find themselves in the infernal fire." There's a lot of rescuing to be done, it seems, by us. We're being the 1/10 of the world population, and the rest of the world. It's quite a responsibility, friends. Unfortunately, no parts of this chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center. Chapter 11 consists of about 45 handwritten lines in the original language. It's one of the medium-sized chapters of book 8. Moving on to chapter 12. In chapter 12, the Bab enjoins on those of his followers who are over the age of 29 and live within 66 farsakh, which is around 396 kilometers or 248 miles, of the places where he was corporally punished, which, as you know, based on the Baha'i history, that the Bab was assaulted in Shiraz. The governor, Hussein Khan Ajdanbashi, ordered that the Bab be slapped, and he was slapped so hard that his turban fell from his head. And also, in a more severe way, the Bab was bastinadoed in Tabriz after his examination in the gathering in front of the Crown Prince, Majlis Valiahd. And this was when he was brought from, I believe, Chehrir. So this could also give some some scholars like Dr. Saidi and Dr. Muhammad Hosseini have viewed this, that this could have been, this portion of the Bayán could have been revealed during the Chehrir period because of this. I personally believe that the concept of time, when it comes to the manifestation of God, they know what's going to happen. Some of these events are basically very clearly known to them through God. So this could have been prior to the bastinado, the episode of the bastinado and the examination before the tribunal of the Crown Prince. So anyways, but in any event, the Bab says if you're over the age of 29 and you live within a 248 miles radius of these two cities, you must travel once every year to these locations and observe for 19 days takhlis. And takhlis, if you recall from book 7, chapter 4, is a form of self-purification. And he says, and to recite 5 rak'ah of namaz, the obligatory prayer, during each day. Now, what is the significance of this, you may ask? Well, for me, this is to remind people of what they have done to the manifestation of God, to remember the suffering for the sake of humanity, that manifestations of God come, they make a sacrifice. Bob's was an exemplary sacrifice, very similar to that of Jesus Christ, but perhaps more intense in many ways. But again, we're not here to compare apples to oranges and so on and so forth as far as persecutions, but they were subject of trials and tribulations and final martyrdom in a brutal way in both cases. So I found that very fascinating, that the Bab has ordained this particular law for the believers, and he has exempted the women from this. It's only the men to do that. It is somewhat of a tedious task to do, to go and do this and be dedicated. But obviously, this law has not been reinstated in the Baha'i revelation. So it does have a very special symbolism, if you will. So no parts of this chapter have been translated into English, nor has been discussed by Dr. Saidi in his book. With only 15 handwritten lines in the original language, chapter 12 is among the shorter chapters of book 8. In chapter 13, the Bab ordains that all believers must praise the primal point and him whom God shall make manifest by repeating God is great, Allahu Akbar, 95 times at the time when each of them ascends their earthly throne, meaning the Bab and Baha'u'llah's declaration, as well as the time when they each descend from their earthly throne, meaning during the time of their passing. So this is a kind of a commemoration of those, and in an effect, it's making a holy day out of these 4 days, if you will, the day of the declaration of the Bab, and the day of his martyrdom, which are holy days, and then the day of the declaration of Baha'u'lláh, which is the festival of Rizwan, which are holy days as well, and Baha'u'llah's ascension, which is also a holy day. So again, this is a foreshadowing of the holy days that are now in practice amongst the Baha'is. No parts of this chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center. No parts of it have been discussed by Dr. Saidi in his book. Like chapter 12, chapter 13 consists of about 15 handwritten lines in the original language. In the beginning of chapter 14, the Bab writes, "Permission hath been granted by God that if anyone is able to, they must recite every day and night 700 verses from the Bayán." Wow. If, however, they are unable to do so, they should repeat the phrase, God is the most manifest, Allahu Azhar, 700 times. The fruit of this commandment is that every believer could come to recognize him whom God shall make manifest in the day of resurrection. 3 lines later, the Bab continues, "Since that day is a great day, it would be sorely trying for thee to identify thyself with the believers. For the believers of that day are the inmates of paradise, while the unbelievers are the inmates of the fire. And know thou of a certainty that by paradise is meant recognition of and submission unto him whom God shall make manifest, and by the fire the company of such souls as would fail to submit unto him or to be resigned to his good pleasure." Continuing, the Bab writes, "On that day thou wouldst regard thyself as the inmate of paradise and as a true believer in him, whereas in reality thou wouldst suffer thyself to be wrapped in veils, and thy habitation would be the nethermost fire, though thou thyself wouldst not be cognizant thereof. Compare his manifestation with that of the point of the Quran. How vast the number of the letters of the gospel who eagerly expected him, yet from the time of his declaration up to 5 years, no one became an inmate of paradise except the commander of the faithful and those who secretly believed in him. This last statement, it was in earlier books, there was a reference to Ali being the only one who recognized the Prophet Muhammad. The Bab here sheds more light on that statement here, that there were others who secretly believed in him. And as I said, Khadija, and there were other individuals. But Ali was the bow of the ship of God at that time. He was the exponent of, he was next to the Prophet Muhammad. He stood, amongst the tribes, amongst the clans, amongst the people, and declared his belief in Prophet Muhammad and supported him 100%. So here, and that's why he was referred to Amir al-Mu'mineen, commander of the faithful. So this is not to say that the Bab is ignoring others, but he's focusing, he's shedding more light on Ali, being in that very difficult period, that he was the courageous of all the believers that stood by the Prophet Muhammad and defended the cause of God, defended him, literally, but with his sword, through his words. So that's why his title, the commander of the faithful, that's why his station is so exalted as well. And the Bab continues, all the rest were accounted as inmates of the fire. So going back to that statement, so here, how vast the number of the letters of the gospel who eagerly expected him, yet from the time of his declaration up to 5 years, no one became an inmate of paradise except the commander of the faithful, and those who secretly believed in him. All the rest were accounted as inmates of the fire, though they considered themselves as dwellers in paradise. Likewise, behold this revelation. The essence of the people have, through divinely conceived designs, been set in motion, and until the present day, 313 disciples have been chosen. Now the Bab continues. It says, in the land of Saud, Isfahan, which to outward seeming is a great city, used to be the capital of Iran under the Safavid dynasty, in every corner of whose seminaries are vast number of people regarded as divines and doctors. Yet when the time came for inmost essences to be drawn forth, only its swifter of wheat donned the robe of discipleship. This sifter of wheat, I want to pause here to tell you who this individual was. It's a reference to Muhammad Ja'far Gandum Pakun. His family still are believers and are I believe they're throughout the world. And he was the first believer who became the Bábí through the teachings of Mullah Hussein. When the Bab declared and completed the first unity, all the letters of the living, then he sent them to various locations to teach the cause. He sent Mullah Hussein to go to Tehran, if you recall. But on his way, Mullah Hussein stopped in Isfahan and taught the faith there. And the first person to recognize the cause of the Bab was Muhammad Ja'far Gandum Pakun, who was a very humble man, a sifter of wheat. Now, I will tell you, this is the most remarkable thing. No individual, no human being has ever been mentioned twice in basically two holy books. Gandum Pakun, Muhammad Ja'far Gandum Pakun, has been mentioned both in the Bayán as well as in the Kitab Aqdas. Baha'u'lláh makes reference to him, in the Kitab Aqdas. So what an incredible honor, what an incredible to single out this individual who was a very humble man, whose heart was so pure that he embraced the cause without hesitation after being taught the faith. So here, both the Bab and Baha'u'lláh put contrast that in the sight of God, the erudition of the individual does not matter. It is who embraces the cause of God, and devotes his life to it, which matters in the sight of God. So this is, again, singling out this, and the example of the sifter of wheat is very significant in my opinion, and it's worth reflecting on it. So the Bab continues, this is the mystery of what was uttered by the kindred of the Prophet Muhammad, upon them be the peace of God, concerning this revelation, saying that the abased shall be exalted and the exalted shall be abased. Okay? Now, continuing on, likewise, in the revelation of him whom God shall make manifest, among those to whom it will never occur that they might merit the displeasure of God, and whose pious deeds will be exemplary unto everyone, there will be many who will become the personifications of the nethermost fire itself, when they fail to embrace his cause, while among the lowly servants, whom no one would imagine to be of any merit, how great the number who will be honored with true faith, and on whom the fountainhead of generosity will bestow the robe of authority. For whatever is created in the faith of God is created through the potency of his word. This is a marvelous statement by the Bab regarding the tests that will assail everyone, and high and low. And there are those who will, in each revelation or in each phase of the revelation, will go through these tests. For example, the two prominent example of the letters of the living. There are, and hopefully, if we have time, I doubt we will have time in this course, but to look at the two letters of the living, one, the Hadi Qazvini that I made mention of, Mirza Hadi Qazvini, who has many tablets from Baha'u'lláh. In fact, this last translation that just came out from the Universal House of Justice, there's a tablet addressed to him, a tablet from letter Ha. The letter Ha is actually from letter Ba to letter Ha. This is from Baha'u'lláh to Hadi Tabrizi, who was a letter of the living. He did not recognize Baha'u'lláh, caused Baha'u'lláh a lot of grief, rose against Baha'u'lláh, challenged Baha'u'lláh in vain, and was recipient of tremendous exhortations by Baha'u'lláh. In contrast to that, the other letter of the living, who actually survived, and we have excerpt of the addresses by Baha'u'lláh to him, and that was Mullah Baqir Tabrizi. Mullah Baqir Tabrizi became known as the letter of the living, and there's sections of a beautiful tablet by Baha'u'lláh in the Gleanings, where Baha'u'lláh talks about how pleased the Bab is with him for having recognized him whom God shall make manifest. So one yielded the fruit of paradise, the other one yielded the fruit of the infernal fire. So you will see that, and both were letters of the living, and had a very high rank in the dispensation. One who did not recognize the purpose, the superordinate goal of the revelation of the Bab, became of abased of all, and hence this statement. Whatever is created in the faith of God is created through the potency of his word, and then the fact that those who are exalted may become abased, and those who are abased will become exalted. Anyhow, so it's something to reflect on and a very important concept in this revelation. Chapter 14 consists of about 52 handwritten lines in the original language. The preceding excerpt translated into English by the Baha'i World Center constitutes only about 29, about 30% of the entire chapter 14. Moving on to chapter 15. In chapter 15, the Bab prescribes the law of matrimony unto his followers. The chapter begins with these words, on that it is binding for everyone to marry so that a soul may remain after them who would testify to the unity of God, the Lord of the heavens and the earth. For those of you who know the verse from the Aqdas, this is almost verbatim. Comparing this to Baha'u'llah's pronouncement on marriage in the Kitab Aqdas, God hath prescribed matrimony unto you. Enter into wedlock, O people, that ye may bring forth one who will make mention of me amid my servants. This is my bidding unto you. Hold fast to it as an assistance to yourselves. This is paragraph 63 of the Kitab Aqdas. The Bab continues his matrimonial commandment by adding that it would be unlawful for any believer to marry a non-believer, and he grants dispensation to those new believers who had previously married an unbeliever to divorce their spouse should she or he refuse to embrace the new faith of God. Although Baha'u'llah has abrogated this Bayanic law allowing for interfaith marriage, he does state in the Kitab Aqdas, whoso contenteth himself with a single partner from among the maidservants of God, meaning the believers, the female believers, both he and she shall live in tranquility. So there is a wisdom to that as well, to marry someone who is already a believer. There's certain advantages, as we all know. But again, it has not been disallowed in the Baha'i faith to marry a person who's not at the time a believer in the cause of God. Oftentimes, through the efforts of the spouse, the other individual embraces the cause of God anyway. So as long as that occurs, that's wonderful. However, the Bab does go on to say, but before the exaltation of the cause of God in the day of him whom God shall make manifest, it is permissible for male and female believers to marry non-believers, that perchance they may return to the religion of God, that those non-believers may return to the religion of God. So the Bab makes a caveat here that generally, until him whom God shall make manifest, which again, when Baha'u'llah came, he somewhat tweaked that law and changed it slightly to allow more freedom for people to marry from other cultures, other race, and other faith groups as well. Unfortunately, no parts of this chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center. Chapter 15 consists of about 32 handwritten lines in the original language. Moving on to chapter 16. In chapter 16, which only consists of about 18 handwritten lines in the original language, the Bab sets out the provisions for a material tax similar to that of Baha'u'llah's Huququllah, the right of God. However, since this law has not been reconfirmed in the Baha'i revelation, we will forego any discussion of its details. However, towards the end of the chapter, the Bab encourages every believer to remember their parents during their daily prayers and meditation. This section has been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center and is as follows. It is seemly that the servant should, after each prayer, supplicate God to bestow mercy and forgiveness upon his parents. Thereupon God's call will be raised. Thousands upon thousands of what thou hast asked for thy parents shall be thy recompense. Blessed is he who remembereth his parents when communing with God. There is verily no God but him, the mighty, the well-beloved. Moving on to chapter 17, although in the opening lines of chapter 17, the Báb introduces yet another material tax which would have applied only to those who were very wealthy. The primary theme of this chapter is obedience to God. اطاعت خداوند. He uses that Persian phrase, اطاعت خداوند, which literally means obedience to God. The Báb writes, the substance of this gate is that there is no higher rank than the rank of obedience to God. It is for this reason that in every revelation among the believers of that dispensation, the pride of some over the other would be through their display of obedience to God and nothing else. Very fascinating. The Báb then gets into a long commentary on this theme, which encompasses the rest of the chapter. Unfortunately, no parts of this chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it have been discussed by Dr. Saidi in his book. With 98 handwritten lines in the original language, chapter 17 is indeed the longest chapter of book 8. Chapter 18 is entitled On Fasting. So this is when the Báb introduces the law of the fast. In this chapter, the Báb outlines the provisions of fasting and comments on its significance in the new revelation. The chapter begins with these words: devote yourselves to the remembrance of God for 19 days at the end of each year. So here, where the Bahá'u'lláh has designated Shahrul Allah, the very last month of the year, as the month of fasting, it originates here by the Báb. So devote yourselves to the remembrance of God for 19 days at the end of each year, so that ye are accounted among those who fast for his love. The substance of this gate or chapter is that thou must first comprehend God's intention in ordaining the fast and what is its fruit. The purpose of fasting, he goes on to say, is that thou may fast from anyone who is not godly. Very fascinating. He says the purpose of the fast, according to the Báb, is that thou may fast from anyone who is not godly, or remove yourself from that. Now, I know the Baha'u'lláh have commented on the significance of the fast in this revelation, but what the Báb is not denying those. What Báb is saying is, he says that the supreme purpose of it in his revelation, that you would remove yourself from the ungodly, in that you are preparing yourself for the revelation of God, which is very eminent, the next revelation of God, which is the revelation of him whom God shall make manifest. So we have to look at that within that light, that the Báb statement is in that vein. It's meant to be, to encourage his followers to purify themselves, to remove themselves, to eschew all fellowship from the ungodly. I think that sounds very familiar, right? You know, مصاحبت ابرار را غنیمت دان و از مرافقت اشرار دست و دل هر دو بردار. You know, this is in the Persian hidden words. Number 3 is cherish the companionship of the righteous and eschew all fellowship with the ungodly. Now, further into the chapter, the Báb writes, when fasting, and this is Dr. Saidi's translation, when fasting, it behooveth the one who fasts to take heed lest he be veiled from the good pleasure of God, so that during his fast, should the tree of truth shineth forth and commandeth the breaking of the fast, he would unhesitatingly obey. Now here, again, this tree of truth is the coming of him whom God shall make manifest. So basically, all the commandments are of the Bayán are subordinate to the will and the commandment of him whom God shall make manifest. So again, this is also a preparatory step to push his followers towards being more aware and being more ready for the advent, the imminent advent of him whom God shall make manifest. And so the tree of truth shineth forth and commandeth the breaking of the fast, he would unhesitatingly obey. Abstain thyself from drinking, eating, sexual intercourse, contention, even in words, injustice, even to a minute extent, and pronouncing judgment against God. These abstinence, these guides to abstinence, it has been reconfirmed by Bahá'u'lláh. So this is abstaining from drinking, eating, sexual intercourse, contention, even in words, injustice, even to a minute extent, and pronouncing judgment against God. Pay special attention to the last three injunctions. What were the last three injunctions? Is contention, even in words, injustice, even to a minute extent, and pronouncing judgment against God. Pay special attention to these last three injunctions, inasmuch as from the inception of this revelation till the commencement of the next revelation, whosoever pronounceth judgment against the point of the Bayán hath pronounced judgment against God, which will render his fasting null and void. So he basically is saying, as all these great clergymen in Iran who fast during the month of Ramadan, okay, then hoping for their self-purification and drawing near to God, that it's all have been nullified because of the fact that they have pronounced judgment against the Bab. So they are accursed of God. Their deeds are not acceptable in the sight of God because of the banishment of the Bab, and later on leading to his martyrdom and so on and so forth. So this is again a reference to the acts of the persecutions by the religious leaders and the most so-called pious of the Muslim clergies in Iran and elsewhere. Unfortunately, no parts of chapter 18 have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center. This chapter consists of about 44 handwritten lines in the original language. Moving on to chapter 19, the primary theme of the last chapter of book 8 is none else than anticipation of the coming of him whom God shall make manifest, and spiritual preparation of every believer through prayer, that no one may become veiled at the time of his advent. Fortunately, little over 1/3 of this chapter has been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center. And the translated passages from this chapter are as follows in their proper sequence. The Bab writes, likewise consider the manifestation of the point of the Bayán. There are people who every night until morning busy themselves with the worship of God, and even at present, when the day star of truth is nearing its zenith in the heaven of its revelation, they have not yet left their prayer rugs. If any one of them ever heard the wondrous verses of God recited unto him, he would exclaim, why dost thou keep me back from offering my prayer? O thou who art wrapped in veils, the answer comes. If thou makest mention of God, wherefore sufferest thou thyself to be shut out from him who hath kindled the light of worship in thy heart? If he had not previously revealed the injunction, verily make ye mention of God, what would have prompted thee to offer devotion unto God, and whereunto wouldst thou turn in prayer? So this is a conversation that the Bab is having by these these so-called pious believers who are completely wrapped in their own world and veiled from recognizing that their promised one is now manifest and is in their midst, and And even if he beckons them, they are so veiled that they will argue with the manifestation of God. The Bab continues, know thou of a certainty that whenever thou makest mention of him whom God shall make manifest, only then art thou making mention of God. In like manner shouldst thou hearken unto the verses of the Bayán and acknowledge its truth. Only then would the revealed verses of God profit thee. Otherwise, what benefit canst thou desire therefrom? For wert thou to prostrate thyself in adoration from the beginning of life till the end, and to spend thy days for the sake of God's remembrance, but believe in the exponent of his revelation for the age, dost thou imagine that thy deeds would confer any benefit upon thee? On the other hand, if thou believest in him and dost recognize him with true understanding, and he saith, I have accepted thine entire life spent in my adoration, then assuredly hast thou been worshiping him most ardently. The purpose in performing thy deeds is that God may graciously accept them, and divine acceptance can in no wise be achieved except through the acceptance of him who is the exponent of his revelation. For instance, if the apostle of God, may divine blessings rest upon him, accepted a certain deed, in truth God accepted it. Otherwise, it hath remained within the selfish desires of the person who wrought it and did not reach the presence of God. Likewise, any act which is accepted by the point of the Bayán is accepted by God, inasmuch as the contingent world hath no other access unto the presence of the Ancient of Days. Whatever is sent down cometh through the exponent of his revelation, and whatever ascendeth unto the exponent of his revelation. Towards the end of chapter 19, the Bab writes, this is the second excerpt translated by the Baha'i World Center of the same chapter. Ye perform your works for God from the beginning of your lives till the end thereof, yet not a single act is for the sake of him who is the manifestation of God, to whom every good deed reverteth. Had ye acted in such manner, ye would not have suffered so grievously on the day of resurrection. Behold, how great is the cause, and yet how the people are wrapped in veils. I swear by the sanctified essence of God that every true praise and deed offered unto God is not but praise and deed offered unto him whom God shall make manifest. And finally, the Bab writes in this section, deceive not your own selves that you are being virtuous for the sake of God when you are not. For should ye truly do your works for God, ye would be performing them for him whom God shall make manifest, and would be magnifying his name. The dwellers of this mountain who are bereft of true understanding, referring to Mahku, where the Bab is incarcerated. The dwellers of this mountain who are bereft of true understanding unceasingly utter the words, no God is there but God, La ilaha illallah. But what benefit doth it yield them? Ponder a while, that ye may not be shut out as by a veil from him who is the dayspring of revelation. This concludes our study of the book 8. So we are done book 8. Now, if there are some questions about book 8, we will take them here, and then we'll move to the study of book 9 after that.
Yeah, we've got a few questions. Well, Nasreen said, does Baha'u'lláh accept tattoos or not? I'm not sure if you answered that. Well, I guess you said that the World Center was unaware of anything forbidding it.
Yes, I don't. There's nothing in the Abdas. There is nothing that I have come across, and apparently the House. There's nothing in other untranslated tablets that says that you shouldn't. You should not be having tattoos. And let me just put my 2 cents worth here. As you know, there are a lot of indigenous people around the world who for them tattooing is part of their culture, is part of their faith. I believe God is obviously aware of all of that. So for the revelation of Baha'u'lláh, which is a universal revelation for all the peoples of the earth, and not just regionally or not for the Semitic people. Therefore, I would think that to forbid that practice would really alienate so many other people, in that. So just again, we're looking at it from a Western point of view, okay? Mm-hmm. Because it has been a somewhat of a taboo, particularly in the Persian culture. It was mostly the khalkubi, or the tattooing, was the people who were more ruffians, who were people who were not really sort of the mainstream or the upper class or something would get tattoos. But now things are changing, obviously, for people, so in everything, the practice of moderation, okay, I think that's the hallmark of our revelation. So I believe that tattooing is not forbidden, and it can't be forbidden because there are other cultures that practice it. In South Pacific, I know the Maoris use it. I know, in Africa, they there are certain tribes that use it. So I would say no, it's not forbidden. Okay, and if you want to tattoo your body, you're free to do so through your own discretion. The Bab says here, if you wanted to tattoo these names on your chest, is wonderful. There's nothing wrong. It has not been forbidden. You can do what the Bab is telling you to do as far as tattooing. So there you go.
Yeah. Runa asks about henna versus tattooing, whether there's a difference. And she notes that, of course, henna goes on the top of the skin, whereas tattooing is underneath the skin so that it's permanent. Yeah. Certainly there was a widespread custom of using henna in those days.
Yes, the henna is different. And the Bab in this case is not, he does talk about henna in that, the use of henna, and Baha'u'lláh used the henna, but as you know, henna does wash away eventually. Mm-hmm. It does fade away, and you have to redo it, and so on and so forth. So you can do it. When the Bab talks about do it in a beautiful calligraphic way, I don't think it just only, you can do it with henna, but I think it would be more permanent. Again, the passage to me, and to Dr. Saidi, he also uses the word tattoo, and we understand it as being more permanent, but it can be non-permanent as well. So the practice of henna and using it. So I think both have been allowed in Bab's revelation, for sure.
Yeah. Doug notes that most Baha'is I've spoken to say that tattoos are not allowed. If this text in Book 8 has not been abrogated, then why would this be restricted now? And I think this is back to the same question that maybe Baha'is really don't know what they're talking about.
Yes. I think we just say things based on a certain preconceptions. I always say, back your statement with authoritative verses, not based on hearsay and not based on what you think it may have been. If you can't back it up, even if you think you may have heard it, that's just, look, the way we, and I thought Dr. Stockman can tell you about this because he's done some research on this, about pilgrim notes. Even pilgrim notes, which are people who have heard from the mouth of the beloved guardian or Abdul Baha certain things. It's not authoritative unless we have a text for it. So again, our faith has been very clear when it comes to authority. The text has to be valid. no matter, I mean, even some of the utterances of Baha'u'lláh are that are in the memoirs of Hossein Ashchi and of Rizaq Annad. They're considered sort of paraphrase words of Baha'u'lláh. That's the historical significance, but if Baha'u'lláh says, repeat this verse, and we can't find it anywhere else, that it doesn't have that authority that others have. So I think we're clear on that.
Aruna says, can you briefly explain the difference between an abba and a jobah? It was the jobah perhaps worn by the ulama?
Jobah, it's jobah. And you know what? I don't care to go into it because there are maybe some nuances about it's about a clothing. It's about a type of clothing, and it's the one is I think an inner abba is more of an outer. And jobah. You just have to if you Google it, I'm sure it will come up. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't care to go into it, as far as, but it is two types of male clothing that was very common at the time. And the Bab says, God does not like you to pray in jobah, but it's okay to do it. So it's not significant. I don't think it's been really stipulated in the Baha'i faith in such a way.
Right. Nasreen asks for you to elaborate on the Bab's request that a person write a special testament. I think this was back at the time from the time of the declaration of the Bab through the time of He whom God shall make manifest. People are supposed to write down their good and bad deeds, I guess.
Yes. So you write your good. Yeah, it's a marvelous thing. It's basically like journaling. You're writing of what you have done. So because during the day of judgment, that's what really the essence of the day of judgment is about. Being judged. So this way, you are fully aware of what you have done. God knows what you have done, but now you're fully aware. It's now in writing, and so you can humble yourself. I believe it's a practice of humility more than anything. And obviously, the Bab, some of these provisions were later lifted by Baha'u'lláh. For example, I was just reading the other day the provision that you're not allowed to ask any questions from Him whom God shall make manifest. Right. He will tell you what you, and the Baha'u'lláh says that we have lifted that. You can ask whatever questions you like, and and His grace is abounding. He basically gives us the privilege, and thank God for that. Because people asked, and we received so many wonderful, illuminating elucidations and expositions on various dimensions of the faith. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm skipping down here a bit. We again come across mention of people not recognizing God's manifestations. Is it a consensus that this is due to man's choice rather than blaming God or holding God responsible in some way for the inability of someone to recognize the words or the person of the manifestation? Doug asked that question.
Well, that's a very good question, Doug, and it's been beautifully answered by Baha'u'lláh, translated by beloved guardian in the Gleanings. Go look it up. It basically, I'll paraphrase it, but you can go look it up, where he basically says that in this day, through the profusion of revelation, that there was so much, the whole entire humanity, the whole world has been flooded with revelation, and there is absolutely no excuse for anybody. He says that. He has said that a few times. In this passage, he says that if someone that has not recognized or has not even heard about God, about His manifestation, and ascends to the next world and comes before their Maker, and says, just because others did not recognize, I too, like them, did not recognize, Baha'u'lláh says that God will not accept that excuse. So, we all have been given free will. We all have been, in some point in our lives, I believe God is the all just. Any human being on this earth will somehow be exposed, I believe, through, whether it's through a word, through an advertisement, through this, that, and the other, we will get, based on our capacity, based on our destiny, we will get and this is my belief, that we will get exposed in such a way that we will have the choice to determine whether we want to embrace that or not to embrace it. And even if we don't, Baha'u'lláh says that, it's probably through your own acts of sitting at home and not, again, Baha'u'lláh doesn't say sitting at home, but I'm just saying it's because of your own dereliction of your spiritual duty that you have not come to recognize that. So the onus and the responsibility is squarely placed on every individual human being, and not because of the fact that I lived in the sort of the mountains of or the whatever, and I could not be, I did not have anybody tell me, So anyways, that's how I view it.
That sounds good. Let's see. This is the next question. I think this is the next question here. I think I moved it down. It appears that the Bab declares, this is also Doug, appears that the Bab declares that at one's death, one can repent and or recognize the manifestation's words and be redeemed, so to speak. This concept is common to many religions in different ways. In other words, one can be a transgressor of the law until their dying day, and at that time of death be saved from punishment in some way.
Yeah, this has been mentioned in the writings as well. There is a concept that is very common and believed even amongst the believers, Baha'is, today that our end shall be well. Husn khatimeh.
Let's hope so.
Yes, and that is something that we all yearn for. I recall my beloved teacher and mentor, Dr. Riaz Qadimi, used to say that that's all he wanted, that he would have husn khatimah, that his end will be well. Because there are so many people, even exalted people, that can, that towards the end of their lives, they can go sideways. And, we know hands of the cause of God. We know many great itinerant teachers of the faith who broke the covenant, and so on and so forth. So again, this concept of redemption on the last minute or going the other way, it's very common. It's part of the human drama. It's just that we have free will until we are breathing on this plane, and then and through our free will we make choices, and hopefully we'll make the right choices.
And Doug completes his trifecta of questions with this one. I really don't understand why anything should be repeated 95 times, and or why God would ask for this. God hears even without spoken words and should have no need to receive any words more than once. Is this practice meant to be a chant or something else? I think it's meditative myself. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's just it's a reminder, I think, that it's any repetition is there to remind. When he says recite the verses of God every morning and evening, it's not that God needs us to pray for him or recite his words. It's just so we can be reminded. We are generally tend to be very easily distracted, and especially in the Western society where there are so many sources of distraction right now, that there needs to be something that constantly refocuses our attention unto God. So repetition of 95 times Allahu Akbar is one way of reminding ourselves that, I'm here for lot greater purpose, my spiritual well-being, not making my mortgage and going on a vacation or doing this and that. And making extra money, in stocks or something like that. So it's really about, we are first spiritual beings, and then we have a physical reality. So.
Yeah, there's a quote, a passage in the Hidden Words: "Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee."
That's right.
That really, I think, summarizes it as if it's a reciprocal relationship, and if you're not reaching out to God, you're also blocking your ears, as it were. It's that reaching out that's also the opening to receive, seems to me.
Yes.
Anyway,
I think that is to kind of end that, reminded me of this. The beloved hand of the cause, William Sears, used to say that if you feel disconnected from God, who moved? You know, so
Yeah.
so really, God is there always. Love is there. It's just when you move away, you
Yeah.
become disconnected, and so it's us that, you know, we move or we make changes and so on. But God is consistent and He's there, as the Quran says. He's closer to us than our jugular vein. So He
Right.
is there. He is everywhere. So
Right.
okay.
Yeah. Runa, there's a few more here. Runa says she wants to clarify, was there only one letter of the living Mirza Hadi Qazvini who broke the covenant? Did the other 17 letters remain faithful to the covenant?
Well, first of all, this is a good question. Many of them, a majority of them, including the great exponent like Quddus, Tahireh, Mullah Hussein, Sayyid Hussein Yazdi, they were all martyred, you know,
Right.
and many of the letters of the living, like Mullah Jalil Urumi, these were all killed during the Sheikh Tabarsi insurrection, because remember, the Bab had ordered that all his faithful should join the defenders of the fort of Sheikh Tabarsi. So there were a very handful, literally, that had remained, you know, very minority, very small number. I mean, literally handful. Some of them we don't know what happened, like Sheikh Saeed Hindi. We don't know what happened to him. And there were, you know, I think Mullah Hassan Bajistani, I believe, he became somewhat disillusioned. I think there is but I don't think he actively opposed Baha'u'lláh. The one who actively opposed, who stands out very prominently, is Hadi Qazvini. Okay, and then the one who really not only brought the good, you know, was a faithful follower of Baha'u'lláh and a great teacher of the faith, and someone who Baha'u'lláh showered with so much love and grace, and who remained faithful, was Mullah Baqir Tabrizi, who became Baha'u'lláh referred to him as Harf Hayy, the letter of the living. And he died a natural cause. I believe he died in Istanbul somewhere, you know, when he was outside of Iran. But anyway, so those were the real, you know, those are the two prominent ones that I can see the contrast between the darkness and light, you know, the good and the evil, you know, if you will, when it came to that. But as far as any other letter of the living who actually rose to bring sorrow to Baha'u'lláh, I believe there wasn't any more at this point. No one else comes to mind.
Good to know. One or two more questions, and I'll mention to Nasreen that I have no idea what your question, what's act meant, what's act mean in the Bayán? So maybe if you can clarify that. I'll ask a question by Runa right now. What's act mean in the Bayán? I don't know what's act mean in the Bayán means, so I'll see if she can clarify that. Runa asks, in the abstinence of the fast, in particular sexual intercourse, where can we find this? It's not included in the compilation, the importance of obligatory prayer and fasting, nor is it in the Aqdas. It is somewhat implied by Abdul Baha, as in I am abstaining from bodily desires and from all occupation with food and drink. But I'm wondering if there is another reference. Actually, I've never seen a reference to it in the writings of Baha'u'lláh either. But
yeah, again, this is something that even though it has not been explicitly mentioned, but it is, you know, again, it's one of those physical pleasures, you know. I mean, it's part of what we you know, naturally comes to us as human beings, you know, to eat, to drink, and to also have sexual relationship through the institution of marriage. So, and here the Bab has made it very clear, and again, it's one of those laws that that has not been abrogated by Baha'u'lláh or you know, and again, and if we read probably in the writings of Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi, you will come across, and maybe some of it has not been translated or will come to light, that there is this sort of the abstinence, abstinence from bodily desires, I think that comes in. So I think sexual intercourse, any kind of sexual pleasure or sexual intercourse, we'll fall into that. But again, I don't have a turban, so I don't know what we must. I'm just sharing my own perspective, but it's a good question. Certainly, I would say that, to be on the safe side, God said when you're fasting, you shouldn't have that. And these are to also have to not utter unseemly words. These are all mentioned. So again, the Bab talks about the three physical and then three moral injunctions that he gives as far as fasting, which is very fascinating. You have to understand that there are certain things that, even though the revelation is silent on, if it's a good thing, it continues on. It's a good thing. Look, like the tattoo portion of it might be somewhat controversial, but look, we came across previously about not reading someone's letters. Okay, this is I looked in the writings of Baha'u'lláh. I haven't published. I have not found any references directly to that. However, I found a reference in Persian from a tablet of Abdul Baha, where he says is absolutely forbidden to read someone else's letters and open someone else's letters. So again, this goes back to what the Bab had said that. So again, I think some of these laws that are good, that have this universal appeal, should remain, in our conscience, in way of us practicing it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing.
Right.
So.
And then the final question here, Nasreen asks, she wants to write research for a non-Baha'i, and what subject you suggest she write about?
Oh my goodness, on the Persian Bayán?
She doesn't say. She says she wants to write a research for a non-Baha'i. What subject should she suggest? It's I guess scholarship stuff.
Well, maybe I should reflect on that before I say anything. Maybe she can email me, and I can answer that in an email.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Then you can ask some more questions. Those are all the questions.